Hi guys, and welcome to another episode of Kabir Considers. In this video, we're going to react to 7 American habits that are rude in the UK. So, I'm trying to think of what those would be. So, British people are a bit more reserved than the American people. So maybe, I don't know, like, I was going to say just starting a conversation randomly, but a lot of people would enjoy that, myself included. You know, just someone randomly starting a conversation with me. So maybe not that. I'm trying to think what else. Tipping? No, people would probably really appreciate getting a 20% tip, you know. Yeah, I can't really think of which ones would be offensive.
The British person that I was with was like, we can't just move. We have to ask. And I'm like, you don't have to ask. You just do it and then it happens. Honestly, I was considered a quiet person in the US. I spent my entire life in the US with people asking me to speak up and to talk louder because they couldn't hear me. I moved to the UK and within a couple days, people are telling me to be quiet. Hi and welcome back to the Girl Gone London channel. If you're new here, my name is Kaylin. I'm an American who's lived in the UK for over 10 years, and today we're talking about 7 American habits that are considered rude in the UK. I have accumulated many of these examples personally, as well as stories I've heard from fellow American expats who live in the UK and are usually trying to do their best, but are sometimes accidentally being rude or just weird. Now, the first thing on my list of an American thing to do that would be considered rude or not acceptable or just strange in the UK is giving a guest a house tour. So in the States, it's not considered weird. Americans love giving a house tour. A visitor comes over to your house and you want to show them around your house. And I know that the British people in the audience are initially going to think, well, it's because Americans want to show off their house. And we don't do that here. We don't brag about things like Americans do. And in some ways, that could be true. You could be proud of your house or things that you've done to it, and maybe you do want to show it to somebody for some appreciation. However, there is also another element to this to consider. Now, what I've come across in the UK is that your house is considered a very personal space for the people who live there. And of course, you can have visitors over, and people do have visitors over at times, but it seems to be that British people love meeting out and about. So typically, a British home is going to be smaller than an American home in many instances. So practically, it doesn't always make sense to have people in your space. But equally, in the UK, we have pub culture and restaurants that allow you to sit and enjoy your meal for more than like 20 minutes. So in the UK, meeting friends and meeting people out is much more done than in the US. In the US, we do enjoy our home as a place to have people over for longer periods of time. And so this reflects back on why Americans love giving a house tour, because in some ways we are trying to make our guests feel at home. And I'm not in any way saying that we're showing them our underwear drawer, but you might show them around and take them around your house in kind of a welcoming kind of way. This isn't done in the UK. So if you have people over, they stick to the rooms that they're allowed in. Most of the house, you like practically board up when someone's coming over, and that's where the visitor is supposed to be. And again, I'm not saying Americans like have guests to their home just wandering every inch of your space, but when they would come to the door, you would welcome them in, and if they haven't been to your home before, you would usually give them some type of tour. Now, the tour...
I think the tour's kind of, I think it's kind of cute. I don't, I think it would be I'd actually quite like it. So here's the living room, here's the bathroom. Because then if you need to use the toilet, you know where to go. I have an uncle, he worked for the police until he retired, who whenever he would come over, he would just by himself look around our family house and try and find any changes that we'd made. It was the funniest thing. He would just like look around and like proper like inspect everywhere.
Tour of my house in the UK would be over in about 30 seconds because, as I said, typically homes in the UK are smaller than in the US. But again, this would be considered weird or rude in the UK because it would mostly be seen as you're trying to show off your home, and that's something that is not done. Now, the next thing on my list actually has to do with American servers within a restaurant and the behavior that would be considered rude, which is not only constantly checking in on you and kind of in some ways
rushing you,
probably to a British person, bothering you during your meal, but in the US, servers just as a general rule, this isn't just one person or considered rude or anything. They will give you your check or your bill for the meal basically as soon as they've delivered the food. If not that, like a couple minutes after.
I didn't have that experience when I was in New York and LA. They didn't give it as soon as we. I would find that really kind of weird. I'd find that quite odd, you know. It's almost like I'm being pushed out of the door. Is that the norm in America now?
That would be considered extremely weird and extremely rude in the UK.
It's like almost like, get out
if your
here.
server is trying to get rid of you. But the thing is, in America, they kind of are, because they rely on tips, which is an entirely different video, and so much of their wage comes from being able to turn over tables quickly. And this would never fly in the UK. The restaurant.
But even in a high-end restaurant, from memory, when we went out to eat, I would ask for the tip. For the check, sorry. I would ask. I'd put my hand up and I'd be like, and they would bring the check over.
One experience is totally different. And so if a British family does go to the US, that's something to remember, that the American waiter or waitress is not within the context of American culture being rude by giving you your bill for the meal really soon after they serve you your food. Another American habit that is considered rude in the UK has to do with eating as well, and that is to do with what you do with your knife and fork after you finish a meal. So in the UK, the polite thing and general thing you're supposed to do, and people just seem to do as a matter
Cross
of
them over.
not even thinking about it, is you put your utensils together on your plate and it looks something like this. And this is not really done in the US. So there is no official signal for I have finished my food or I am done with my meal. And you kind of just leave your utensils wherever you want to leave them. They could be on the plate, they could be off the plate, they could be making a cross, they could be like just stacked in any weird old way. You basically just throw your utensils down and that means you're done.
I think I'm with the Americans on this. If the plate's empty, you're done. You know, I don't like the knife and fork don't have to be perfectly parallel to each other, you know, perpendicular to the sun. Come on.
That is considered rude in the UK in the sense that it's just the polite thing to do to finish your meal by putting your utensils together on the plate, which is something that I have gotten better at remembering to do, but I still have to sometimes remember to do it naturally. And I see other people around me in the UK just doing this naturally, and I have to remember to gather all of my utensils and put them in this line on the plate to show that I'm done. The next thing on my list is Americans being loud. So, I mean, I'm not going to sit here and say that we're not loud. We are loud. Honestly, I was considered a quiet person in the US. I spent my entire life in the US with people asking me to speak up and to talk louder because they couldn't hear me. I moved to the UK and within a couple days, people are telling me to be quiet. Americans just speak loudly. We just are loud, and it's a trait that is considered relatively rude in the UK because it's infringing on other people's right to enjoy the environment surrounding them. And this is particularly prevalent with Americans on like public transportation in the UK. So if you take the tube in London or a train, you can usually hear the Americans before you can see them.
I have a theory about this. I think this is because Americans, the houses are bigger, the buildings are larger, you know, so people are further apart. So to hear each other, you guys need to project more. So that's kind of a theory I've got. Like the houses here are like half the size. So, you know, because you're so much closer, you don't really need to project.
It's just, we're not trying to be rude. We just culturally are loud. And another thing to remember the next time you hear a loud American in the UK is that within the country that we're from, because everybody is loud, you have to speak louder and louder and louder to be heard over the other people. So it doesn't come across as being loud in the US because everybody's being loud. Whereas here in the UK, definitely people are a bit more reserved and a bit more quiet, and suddenly I become the loudest person in the room. The next American habit that's considered rude in the UK, and this is definitely a little bit of a cringy one, is not saying please or thank you or please can you do this, not having those like niceties attached to what you're saying. And this is definitely one of those things I notice when I'm in the US. An example would be if you are in a store and asking where something is. In the UK, you would go up to a person and you would say, "Oh,
Excuse
sorry,
me.
can you please tell me where the flower is?" Or you would just have all these different words to say, excuse me, please can you help me, or something like that. In the US, a lot of people, and this does depend on region a little bit, but a lot of people would just go up to the person in the store and they wouldn't have any of these other words. They would just say, where's the flour? And they might say,
Yeah. I would find that a bit rude. Yeah. Maybe it's just how I was raised. Like, because there's, I just feel like saying please is just like such an easy thing to do, What do you guys think watching this?
say it in a way that to us in the States is still a nice way of saying it. I'm not saying that they're going to be demanding.
Okay.
We could still say it nicely, but we wouldn't include the other words like, excuse me, please can you help me? Can you do
Right.
this? We would just kind of go in directly with our question. And in some ways, this may have to do with the American style of direct communication that I talked about in a previous video, but overall,
But you can be direct and also be polite. I'd say I'm very direct, but still quite polite. You can be both.
it is just sort of bad manners in the UK and in most countries, so I'm not siding with the Americans on this one, but bad manners to not be saying please, not be saying thank you, and things like that. And the next thing on my list that Americans do that can be considered weird in the UK is talking very openly about religion and asking people questions about their religion. And what I mean by this is, in the UK, religion is seen as a personal thing. So you might go to church, you might not, you might go to another religious venue, you might not, but you're not going to expect people that you don't know to ask you about it. In the US, this is a little different. As a country, America is much more religious than the UK, and it is seen as more appropriate to ask a stranger maybe where they go to church, because the assumption is that a lot of people do, especially in certain parts of the US, or you might ask them what religion they are. And again, there's going to be differing experiences of this depending on where you live in America and your age and, your social group and things like that. But as a general rule, it's more acceptable in the US to speak about and to ask strangers or acquaintances about religion. In the UK, this is definitely considered rude and not acceptable because religion is viewed as a much more intensely personal and private thing.
This one, again, I'm with the Americans. I just don't see the problem in saying what religion you are, unless maybe you belong to a really sort of niche one like Scientology. What's the big deal? I don't know. Let me know what you guys think. Is it a private thing to you what religion you are? I'm non-religious, for the record.
And the final thing on my list has to do with queuing. Of course it does. The American habit that is considered rude in the UK is essentially pushing to the front of things or taking things before you wait your turn or you ask. In the UK, the art of queuing is well known. People are very good at it. People are good at lining up, waiting for things, waiting your turn. The British way is sort of just being like, no, you go first. No, you go first. Or just really having a sense of order when it comes to who gets what next. In America, it is kind of everyone for yourself. We are very bad at lining up. I don't know if you've seen the scene in an iconic American Christmas film called Jingle All the Way with Arnold Schwarzenegger, of all people. But there is a scene when they get a toy into the toy shop that all the parents want, and they essentially trample each other to get to it. This has happened in the US. This is something that I watch and I'm like, yes, this makes sense for America. This is kind of how we operate. And we can even take it from the funny, silly, physical example of, not being able to line up or rushing into a toy shop or something like that. But it also tends to extend to other areas as well. So as an example, there was one time when I was on a plane traveling with a British person and the plane had empty seats in the same economy section that we booked. So it wasn't first class empty seats, but there were empty seats and there were seats that I would have preferred to sit in more than the one that I had, but there weren't that many empty seats. So my American self was like, we're just gonna move. We're just gonna move. We're not gonna ask. We're just gonna go and move to these other seats that are empty. And this has always worked for me. This is just the American way. I see something that's open. I'm like, okay, nobody else is using this.
Take it.
And it's in the same class that I've booked. So I'm just gonna go and sit there. I'm gonna take it. The British person that I was with was like, we can't just move. We have to ask. And I'm like, you don't have to ask. You just do it.
To be fair, in this situation, I would probably just move. Yeah, if the seat's got nobody in there and there's no bag, in the overhead compartment, so it's free, I'm just taking it for sure.
And then it happens. But the British way can be seen as much more polite and less rude, to not just go and assume you can do things, but to ask, to again wait your turn. Is it okay if I go and sit in that other seat? Where the American in me was just like, no one else is doing it, so I'm gonna go and do it. Or if you're in a grocery store or something similar, maybe you come up to an item that is running out and you get to it at the same time as another person. In the UK, it's often the polite thing to say, oh no, go ahead, you have it, you take it. An American is like, no, I got here 0.3 seconds
Yoink.
before you, I'm taking this, have a nice day. I'm not saying it's the best trait to have. I'm just saying that is
how it
what
is.
Americans
Yeah.
are kind of conditioned to be like. You can call it entitled, or you can call it bold, whatever you want to see it as. That is definitely an American habit that is not considered acceptable and is considered rude in the UK.
I think part of it comes down to, you know, the American spirit, you know, the American dream, like making it. I think that's what causes a lot of the, you know, me first type things that have appeared on this list, which, to be fair, have a lot come over to the UK, you know, whether it's because of the media, you know, just the globalization of everything. But yeah, the queuing, I think I prefer. I just, having a queue, like, it's just the most sensible approach to things rather than, you know, free for all, because it just makes the most sense. Like, everybody waits their turn, but then, you know, some might say, oh, but if you can get it first, you know, who cares what the other people, you know, blah, blah, blah. I don't know. I prefer the queue system. Thanks for watching, guys, and I'll see you in the next one.